Everything you know about Ragnarok is only half the story. The wolf swallows Odin, Thor dies choking on serpent venom, fire consumes the 9 realms, and the stars fall into a black sea. Most retellings stop right there, the end of everything. But the Vikings didn't stop there. The actual sources keep going, and what they describe afterward is stranger, more haunting, and more beautiful than the apocalypse itself. A murdered god walks out of the land of the dead. 2 humans crawl from a hiding place inside a tree. And in the final verse of the oldest poem we have, something dark rises out of the ruins of paradise, something that suggests the whole nightmare is destined to happen again. This is the part of Norse mythology nobody talks about, and by the end, you'll understand why the ending they never taught you changes the meaning of everything that came before it. But to understand what rises, you first need to be clear on what was lost. Ragnarok isn't a battle, it's an extinction event. The sun is devoured, the earth burns and then sinks beneath the waves. Odin, Thor, Freyr, Tyr, Heimdall, Loki, all dead. The armies of the dead, the giants, the monsters, annihilated alongside the gods they came to kill. 9 realms reduced to steam and silence. The poets could have ended it there. A grim, heroic, very Viking ending. Everyone dies, nothing matters, fight bravely anyway. They didn't. The Völuspá, the prophecy of the seeress, the oldest and most important poem in Norse mythology, has the seeress look past the fire, and what she sees stops her cold. She sees the earth rise from the sea a second time, green, alive, waterfalls pouring off new cliffs, and an eagle hunting fish along the mountainside. No smoke, no ash. The world doesn't recover from Ragnarok. It's reborn, and it comes back cleaner than it was before. The fields, she says, will grow without being sown, crops springing from the ground with no farmer, no plow, no labor. For a culture that scratched survival out of frozen soil for 8 months a year, that single line was the most radical image imaginable. A world without hunger. Which raises the obvious question, a world for whom? Everyone's dead. Who's left to stand on this new green earth? That's where it gets interesting. Because a handful of gods survive, and when you look at exactly who makes the list, you realize the poets were doing something deliberate. First, Vidar, Odin's son, the silent god, the one who barely appears in any myth, who speaks almost no lines across the entire surviving literature. At Ragnarok, he's the one who avenges his father, tearing apart the jaws of the wolf Fenrir, and then he simply walks out of the fire. The god who never wasted a word outlives all the gods who did. Then Vali, another son of Odin, born for a single purpose, vengeance, and who apparently outlives the purpose he was born for. Then Modi and Magni, the sons of Thor. Their names mean courage and strength, and they walk onto the new earth carrying something with them. Mjolnir, their father's hammer. Thor is gone, but the hammer survives, passed to the next generation like an heirloom pulled from a burned house. Sit with that image for a second. The most famous weapon in mythology, resting in the grass of a world with no more monsters to throw it at. Notice the pattern yet? Every survivor is a child of a dead god. The fathers die, the sons inherit. The old generation, the one built on broken oaths, stolen treasures, and wars with the giants, is wiped away completely. What survives is the generation that hasn't done anything wrong yet. That's not an accident. That's the point. But the survivors are only half of it. Because the new world doesn't just keep the living, it gives back the dead. Baldr returns. If you know one Norse myth beyond Ragnarok, it's probably this one. Baldr the Beautiful, the beloved son of Odin, the god so cherished that every object in creation swore never to harm him. Every object except mistletoe. Loki carved it into a dart, put it in the hand of Baldr's blind brother Hutter, and guided the throw. Baldr's death was the crack in the world. The moment the slide toward Ragnarok became unstoppable. The gods tried everything to get him back from Hell, the realm of the dead, and failed. His death was final. That was the tragedy. Nothing could undo it, except Ragnarok undoes it. When the old world burns, the walls of Hell apparently burn with it, and Baldr walks out. The god whose death started the countdown to the apocalypse only comes back because the apocalypse happened. The Norse built a resurrection into their mythology, and almost nobody knows it's there. And he doesn't come back alone. Hodr walks out beside him. The brother who killed him. Think about how strange that is. The killer and the victim returning together side by side. The sources say they sit down and talk. No trial, no vengeance. And this is a culture where vengeance was practically a legal system, where blood debts passed down through generations. Yet here, at the bottom of everything, the first act of the new world is a murdered god sitting in peace with the brother who murdered him. The old world ran on the endless engine of retaliation. Kill, avenge, retaliate, repeat. All the way to Ragnarok. The new world's founding act is the engine switching off. There's one more survivor, and he might be the strangest of all. Hoenir. If you've never heard of him, that's fitting. He's the god the myths themselves nearly forgot. Long ago, after the war between the two tribes of gods, Hoenir was sent to the Vanir as a hostage, and he failed. Indecisive, useless without someone whispering advice in his ear, the Vanir were so insulted they beheaded his companion in frustration. Hoenir was a divine embarrassment, a footnote. And yet in the world after Ragnarok, the Völuspá gives him a role of honor. He chooses the lots of prophecy. He reads the future. The god who couldn't make a single decision in the old world becomes the seer of the new one. Odin sacrificed an eye for wisdom and died anyway. Hoenir did nothing and inherits the gift of sight. The new world, it seems, doesn't distribute fates by merit. It distributes second chances. So the young gods gather, and the poem gives us one of the most quietly devastating images in all of ancient literature. They meet on Idavol, the plain where Asgard once stood, and there, in the grass, they find the golden game pieces. The chessmen the old gods played with in the morning of the world, back in the golden age before the first war, before the first lie. Small golden figures, scattered in the green, glinting in the light of a sun their owners will never see again. The new gods pick them up. They don't build new ones. They keep them. The one thing that survives from the old world isn't a weapon or a throne, it's a game, a memory of the only time the gods were ever truly happy. Everything else burned. The joy, somehow, was fireproof. Now, what about us? The gods get their heirs and their resurrections. But Ragnarok killed humanity too. The sun that fed every field was eaten out of the sky. So is the new green world just an empty garden for a handful of gods? No. Because two humans made it through. Their names are Lif and Lifthrasir, life and striver after life. While the gods marched out to die in glory, these two did something no saga hero would ever brag about. They hid. They took shelter in a place called Hodmimir's Wood, which many scholars believe is Yggdrasil itself, the world tree. While fire consumed the 9 realms, two human beings were tucked inside the one thing, low enough and deep enough to endure it, and they survived on nothing but the morning dew. No weapons, no last stand, no glorious death. The entire Viking ethos says die fighting and be remembered, and yet when the poets imagined who would carry humanity through the end of the world, they didn't choose a warrior. They chose two people whose only skill was refusing to die. Every human in the new world descends from them. From the Norse point of view, that's us. You, watching this, are downstream of two survivors who waited out the apocalypse inside a tree. And they won't be walking in darkness. Remember, the wolf skull finally caught the sun at Ragnarok and swallowed her. But the poem Vafthrudnismal, a wisdom contest where Odin himself interrogates a giant about the future, reveals something the sun did before she died. She had a daughter, a single bright daughter, who after the wolf's feast rides her mother's path across the sky. Even the sun, in Norse myth, gets an heir. The light that shines on the new world is the child of the light that was lost. The poets applied the same rule to the sky that they applied to the gods. Nothing old survives, but everything old leaves something behind. At this point, the afterworld sounds almost too good. Self-sowing fields, reconciled brothers, a hall called Gimle, roofed with gold, brighter than the sun, where the righteous will live in joy forever. Paradise, plain and simple. Which is exactly when the Völuspá does something that has unsettled readers for 1,000 years. The seeress describes the golden hall, the joy, the peace, and then, in the very last stanza of the poem, the final image of the entire prophecy, she says this: "There comes the dark dragon flying, Nidhogg." The corpse eater, the serpent that spent all of history gnawing the roots of the world tree, rises from the depths, and he flies over the new world carrying dead bodies in his wings. Then the seeress says, now she must sink down, and the poem simply stops. That's the ending, not the golden hall, the dragon. And the sources never explain it. Why is the corpse eater still alive? Whose corpses is he carrying over a reborn world where death was supposed to be finished? Some scholars say it's just the last piece of the old world's wreckage, hauling the dead away, the final garbage truck of the apocalypse, leaving paradise clean behind it. But others read it very differently. They point out that the seeress also mentions a hall on Nastrond, the shore of corpses, a hall woven from the spines of living serpents, dripping venom from the smoke holes, where oathbreakers and murderers wade through poison rivers. Evil, in other words, still has an address in the new world, and if the dragon still flies and the venom hall still stands, then the seed of the next catastrophe is already planted in the soil of the new creation, which leads to the theory that changes everything. What if it's a cycle? What if Ragnarok isn't the end of the world, but the way the world breathes? Golden age, corruption, war, fire, rebirth, around and around, forever. Some scholars have noticed that the golden game pieces found in the grass mirror the golden pieces from the first golden age almost exactly. As if the new gods are starting on the same square, same board, same game, same dragon waiting under the roots. If that reading is right, then our world, the one you're sitting in, might not be the first draft. It might be the world after somebody else's Ragnarok, and the pieces glinting in the grass are already in play. There's one more mystery buried in the sources, and it's the most controversial of all. One version of the Völuspá contains a stanza describing a final arrival. Then comes the mighty one down from above, the powerful ruler who governs all things, to the seat of judgment. Who is that? He's never named. He's not Odin. Odin is dead. He's not any god we can identify. Some argue this is a glimpse of a nameless supreme power the Norse believed stood above even the Aesir, a god behind the gods. Others argue it's a Christian scribe's fingerprint, because here's the uncomfortable truth about all of this. The Völuspá was written down around the year 1000, right as Iceland converted to Christianity. And Snorri Sturluson, the man who compiled most of what we call Norse mythology, was a Christian writing 2 centuries after the old faith died. A dying god who returns from the dead, a paradise for the worthy, a judgment, a world made new. Is that authentic Viking belief? Or Christianity bleeding into the parchment? Scholars have fought over it for 200 years. The honest answer is, we can't fully untangle it. The pagan and Christian threads are woven too tightly. But the core of the vision, the green earth rising, the young gods inheriting, the 2 survivors in the tree, appears in sources and echoes old enough that most scholars believe the heart of it is genuinely pagan. The Norse really did believe something came after. So why does nobody talk about it? Partly because the destruction is simply louder. Wolves eating gods make better television than dew-drinking survivors. Partly because the ending survives in only a few fragile stanzas, while the battle gets verse after verse. But maybe the deepest reason is that the ending complicates the brand. We like our Vikings doomed. The grim warriors who knew the wolf wins in the end and fought anyway. That's the version on the t-shirts. The real mythology is stranger than that. The wolf wins, yes, and then the wolf's victory is undone by grass. Because that's the actual message hiding in these verses. The Norse looked at a universe where even gods die, where even the sun gets eaten, and they refused to let annihilation have the last word. Almost. They gave the last word to a dragon, just to keep us honest. The world ends. The world returns. The fields sow themselves, the brothers forgive each other, the children carry the hammer, and somewhere below, something with wings is still counting corpses. That was their answer to the biggest question there is. Everything you love will be destroyed, and that is still not the end of the story. The gods knew Ragnarok was coming. Odin spent centuries reading prophecies, collecting the dead, preparing for a battle he knew he'd lose. Here's the detail worth carrying out of this video. He also knew what came after. He knew about the green earth, the returning sun, the golden pieces in the grass. Which means every sacrifice the gods made wasn't for their own survival. It was for a world they would never see. They fought the wolf so their children could pick the golden pieces out of the grass. The Vikings had a word for that kind of ending. They didn't call it defeat, they called it a beginning.
If you liked this video, please hit the like and subscribe button for more.